Hi, my name is James Phillips, and thanks for joining me for WirelessCheetah online sales training. The purpose of this training is to quickly enhance your product knowledge as well as go over some talking points and marketing materials. And with that said, let's get started. We believe that managing large wireless networks can be complex, especially if you're a business owner or a venue manager. You most likely have bigger things on your plate than IT. It's not your core business, and wireless IT in particular can be quite challenging. If you're setting out to implement your own wireless network, at the very minimum you'll have to consider coverage, control, and protection of that network. Coverage. How many access points do I need? Access points being the Wi-Fi radios that transmit data. Will these access points be bridged or meshed? Meaning, will they transmit point to point in a fixed path, or will each access point communicate with each other in the network? Which of these access points will be my gateway back to the internet? How will I issue IP addresses to these access points via some sort of DHCP server? As far as control goes, how will I parcel out the bandwidth that I'm getting in for my internet service provider over my Wi-Fi network? How will I manage the access points? Do I have to do that in the field physically, or can I manage them remotely somehow? Maybe I already manage payments as part of my business, but how do I manage payments over the network? Am I set up for that? Is that something I have to worry about security? And I'd like a splash page, but I really don't want to bother with setting one up, or especially changing one every week when my promotions change. And protection. Security is just as important. MAC addresses, those are the unique identifiers associated with each mobile device. Can I track those? Can I block out devices based on those? We talked about secure payment processing, but how about user information security? Do I store any of that, and should I? And who has access to this network, and for that matter, who has access to configure it, the back end? So all of these considerations and more come into play when setting up a wireless network. One that's enterprise, one that's public access, one that's a bigger solution than just setting up a home router for consumer level Wi-Fi. So here's an infographic that boils some of that information down into an image, and this marketing material is available to you. I'll walk through it briefly. Bandwidth management. There are a few ways to manage bandwidth. One, we could just set a hard limit on the download and upload speeds available to users. Maybe nobody can go faster than 5 megabytes per second or something. Otherwise, we could set up a tiered bandwidth structure where maybe paid users are getting the fastest access or the longest access, and then free users have some limitations of speed and time of use. Or maybe we'd like to throttle back the bandwidth use of heavy users. For people who are streaming HD video, for instance, we can make it so that their bandwidth slows over time as they continue to use more and more, so that they can still access the network, but they're not utilizing more resources than is equitable. Those are all aspects of the network that we manage for our clients. I should say right up front, we're in the business of front to back, turnkey, fully managed public access Wi-Fi networks. That's what we do. We take all the administration out of the hands of the customer. And that applies also to brand presence. Users may or our clients may or may not know that they can use their Wi-Fi networks to promote their brands, to portray a company image, to showcase events. You can imagine, sure, we can have a splash page that maybe talks about the company culture or a special that's going on, but we could also use the page before users get internet access for advertisements. Maybe a user must watch a 30-second video before they're allowed access to the network. Or maybe this is a third party's ad that's showing before the internet is available. And you can imagine all the third party arrangements. Maybe a product vendor has some affinity with the client's customer base, and they'd like to show a certain type of product's ads before internet access, and that's a way they could monetize the network. And we'll talk a little more about monetization later. Coverage must be seamless, and an enterprise solution. What I mean by seamless is that users must be able to roam around freely. There may be many radios, Wi-Fi radios in the network, but I can't lose my coverage every time I drop off of one and hop onto another. Our meshed radios offer the user a single SSID, a single network they can log onto, and no matter where they go within our mesh network on the client site, they are covered. That's important for any sort of enterprise solution. and our radios are, the hardware is what we're talking about here. They're robust enough to manage that. As far as controlling access goes, here's a stat. More than 60% of people use any open Wi-Fi network they encounter, and you can count me within that stat. I try to play a little safer. Some users will automatically log on to, they have their devices set to automatically log on to any open Wi-Fi network, and you can imagine if you have a 100-acre site where people are coming and going, there's a lot of on and off strain on the network. The resources that are tapped to track users and devices is strained when you have so many coming on and off. And furthermore, you have security risks potentially. The more people on your network, the greater the risk is for security. The greater the risk is that you don't know everybody on your network, that you don't know all the devices on your network. And probably of all the 5 points on this marketing material infographic, this is the one that a user would not, or that a client would not want to manage the most, because it's the most complex. And again, we turnkey the whole thing. We manage it for them. And finally, payment processing. We talked about the security necessities of a network and its payments, but it also has to be easy. We do both. We're both PCI compliant. I'll mention that a little later, but also easy to use. The payment processing is quick, unobtrusive, and easy for the user, so that you don't leave the user with a bad taste in their mouth for something they're supposed to pay for. That's very important. As you can imagine, when you've purchased things, you want them to work. So that's us. We do it. We do front to back, turnkey, from design to installation to monthly management. We're there every step of the way for managed public access Wi-Fi. That's the space where we live. And to differentiate public access from other Wi-Fi networks, we're talking about networks where users are coming and going. They maybe have only a loose affiliation with the venue, as in they don't work for them or live there. They're public access networks that we're talking about. So let's look at one more marketing material piece. This is our one sheet, and it contains a lot of the information we've already talked about, so I won't belabor any of it, but I will talk about the bolded phrases here. Mesh network, we already know what that means. As a part of our mesh network, we've built in automated fail-safes, automated failovers. This is the logic that we've built in as far as the configuration of the network, how the radios are configured, so that if one of the radios in the network goes down due to weather or power or squirrel attack or whatever, there's another radio ready to take up its slack. And it'll do that automatically without our intervention. Although we can intervene manually, we set these networks up so that they can heal automatically. Bandwidth shaping is just the term that we use to apply to all the manipulations of bandwidth sharing that we use on the network, so that everybody gets a shot at access to a network that's not laggy or slow, so that one person's not hogging it, or so that we can control quality of access for paid users versus non-paid users. Any of that manipulation of the bandwidth offered to the users is bandwidth shaping. And while we welcome all the client feedback on how they'd like to set that up, we take care of the technical details of how it works. Managed service, you see that bolded phrase. That, beyond just the control section, this encapsulates everything that we do with our networks. Again, from design, install, to management, ongoing. We're a managed service, fully turnkey, and that includes the back end. Protection, finally, we have a secure network. I think I've talked about that enough, but the payment processing that we run, if the client is going to have payment processing on his or her network, all of the authorizations are encrypted at AES 256-bit encryption. That's military grade, which is fitting because Innovay, of which WirelessCheetah is a part, Innovay has been a government defense contractor for 13 years, and so our specialty is in handling secure data for the government. And so we use a lot of these same encryption algorithms and security mechanisms that are set in place for the government. Again, military grade. We apply it to the commercial side as well. As an extension of that, our servers that we host all these transactions on are PCI compliant. And again, these are our servers in our network, so we have full control of the back end. These three icons represent three important leave-behind details. We've talked enough about turnkey, I won't talk about it more. Monetization is interesting because this is one aspect that we can negotiate with the client. First, they may not want to even charge their users for access, in which case this is a non-issue. But if they are charging for access, there's going to be some split between the client and us, WirelessCheetah, and who's going to get what percentage of the user's payments. And there are lots of factors that go into that negotiation that we don't have to talk about now. But the point is, the client can either defray the cost of their installation and management, or if there's enough use of a paid network, actually turn a profit and have it be a money-making venture for them to offer paid Wi-Fi access. So we can talk more about that in detail, and Emily Rausch, our VP of Sales, can talk more about how that works. And then finally, let the icon on the right represent everything having to do with the robustness of our hardware. 5 gigahertz, 2.4 gigahertz, that dual band aspect of our outdoor radios is just one aspect of the robustness of our hardware. And let me talk a little more about that. We use our dual band radios such that one band is used for the transmission of data and the other is used for the backhaul functionalities. That's the basically the radios talking to each other. That allows us to push a lot more speed, a lot more bandwidth through to all the users on the network. And I should mention that our indoor radios don't really have any need for the dual band, and they are not dual band radios in indoor, and that's because they have different design considerations. They are still meshed, but they since there are more radios on the network, there are less constraints on them, and they're smaller profile, they're cheaper. So there are a lot of things that go into why the outdoor radios are dual band and the way we use them like that. Just suffice to say, they're strong radios, and both of the indoor and outdoor radios are sufficient for their purposes, more than sufficient, I should say. So the image you're looking at kind of represents the site survey that we perform before we install anything. We need to know let's talk about outdoor first. We need to know what are the hills, what are the trees, what are the buildings that are going to be in the way. We need a clear line of sight between each of the radios, and we'll install as many as necessary to cover the venue fully, but there are a lot of considerations that we need to see before we can quote. And sometimes we can do an outdoor survey from Google satellite imagery. If the image is clear enough, we can just take a bird's eye view photo and sort of give a good estimate of how many radios are going to be necessary. I should mention that one of our outdoor radios transmits up to 300 feet in any direction, which works out to almost 300,000 square feet of coverage, but we don't tap them to that full potential because we build in redundancy to our networks, which goes back to that automated failover. We have redundancy built into our networks. Concerning our indoor radios, there are design considerations such as how many floors are we dealing with, what's the square footage, what are the construction materials of the building, and again, a site survey will help us determine those parameters. Indoor radios are cheaper, but they're, again, different considerations than outdoor radios. So the point is, we handle all of this for the client. They don't have to outsource this aspect of it any further than us. We handle this as part of our turnkey service. The next step is the installation, and that boom lift. Sure, we'll bring a boom lift if we need some to get upper access of buildings or outdoor venues, but we'll also bring all the hardware and mounting hardware, the radios themselves, all the specialized equipment necessary to install quickly without any real we don't destroy anything. We're pulling cable and hanging radios, and that's kind of the bottom line. We don't require anything of the client except for just a little bit of time and space to do this, and we're out of there in usually just a few hours. It's not a days long process in most cases. And let me show you a little bit of what the back end looks like. I should say that the client does not see this back end usually. This is just our admin back end. I'll point out a few key features. Up in the top left, you see users currently connected, and those codes, those are MAC addresses. Those hexadecimal addresses are called MAC addresses. They represent all of the unique mobile devices on our network, and at the time the screenshot was taken, those devices were on the network. So we track those, and we have logs of those. Look a little lower, you see limits are based on a 12-hour period. This table represents the bandwidth shaping that I talked about. In this particular client's instance, the first 1,000 megabytes of data that a user on the network downloads are offered up at a 10,000 kilobit per second rate. And after they've consumed that amount of data within 12 hours, their bandwidth is halved to 5,000 kilobits per second. So you can imagine how that would work. The more data I consume, the slower I get it. And this is a free network. This screenshot represents a free network. So that's fully customizable. We could set it up any way we'd like, or the client would like. And on the right, look at node status. The green names of those are our radios, the access points. You see the names of them, NFA.1002, and so on. And the status indication is green for all the radios. If they were blue or red, we'd know there was some action that was necessary on our part. Usually it's just some sort of notification that we have to check off, but sometimes we need to go deeper and manually reconfigure something, or reboot the radio, or set up the kind of map differently. And we can do all that remotely, and we do that all remotely, and we monitor the statuses of these nodes, and by node I just mean these radios. So it's fully managed, and there are more pages than just this that we look at and that we control the configuration of. But you can imagine a user or a client does not want to deal with these nitty-gritty aspects of the wireless network. We talked through some key configuration elements. One I did not mention yet was the splash page. I didn't show you one, but we can configure that to look any way the customer would like, or if the customer would like a splash page that changes every week to highlight a different promotion, we can do that as well. And as far as other admin tools goes, don't worry about the details of that. There's just more details of what we manage. I'm going to wrap this up with a brief competitor comparison. There are thousands probably of hardware vendors that will sell you wireless hardware and software. These are just a few of them, and I want to say right off the bat, none of these options are turnkey. While there are turnkey options out there, WirelessCheetah being one of those, there are far, far less than there are hardware vendors. So it's important to highlight the differences between a hardware vendor and a fully managed provider. But let's talk through some of those. Meraki, that's a Cisco product, Cisco line of products, and with Cisco you get high price and high quality, and they are high quality products. But we come in at a lower price point than Meraki products for wireless. And again, it's not a managed service. They'll sell you hardware and software for a enterprise level Wi-Fi solution. Next we have OpenMesh. I truly like OpenMesh. I really don't have anything bad to say about them. Just the differences between us and them is their radios are less robust, less enterprise class. I'd say they aren't consumer grade either. They're somewhere in between. They're a step above consumer grade, but they aren't dual band. They transmit only in the 2.4 gigahertz bandwidth spectrum, meaning they're cheaper. Their hardware is cheaper than our hardware, and their cloud management backend, I showed you kind of the equivalent to that screen that you saw was our backend. Theirs is cloud based. It's free, but it's also publicly accessible. Not that you can just log in and change anybody's settings, but it's not as secure as ours. Ours is kept under lock and key, and it's proprietary to us. So there's a difference there. Again, I like OpenMesh, and it's appropriate for some installations, but it's, again, not a turnkey solution. Unify. You can kind of stack this up pretty directly with Meraki. They're probably just about as expensive, give or take, and that goes for both their hardware and their software. But something I've noticed about Unify is they have poor tech support, and this is evidenced by, you could find the same with a Google search. They have poor tech support, which is interesting, because you're going to need tech support if you're going to set up your own wireless network. Even if you're the IT manager, there's going to be something that goes wrong. Like I mentioned at the top of this training, Wi-Fi networks are complex, and I want to differentiate something here. WirelessCheetah doesn't offer tech support. It would go way beyond that. It's fully managed operations. So sure, if you want to say we offer tech support, yeah, we offer tech support, but in truth, we're actively managing the networks for our customers, so it's really not in the same class of service. But Unify, for whatever reason, doesn't even get the tech support part right. And moving on to Ruckus. Ruckus offers an overwhelming product selection for Wi-Fi hardware and software. It's probably geared toward guys like me. I like that sort of thing. I like to see what my options are. I like to browse through tech products, but if you can imagine you're a business manager or owner, you're not going to want to. That's not what you do day to day. That's not your business to play with IT. And even if you wanted to turn over the entire project to your IT manager, it's not something you want him playing with either. It's just more complex than it needs to be. And that's what we believe, and that's why we offer a turnkey solution. Again, Ruckus is not going to say, here's a good solution for your particular situation, and we'll manage it for you. But we will. And that's the difference that I want you to take away. That's our key differentiator. We are a fully turnkey managed service provider for public access wireless networks. So that's it. I appreciate your participation today. Thank you for your attention. If I failed to mention anything that you'd like to know more about, you can email me at james@cheetahservice.com, or you can email Emily, our VP of Sales, at emily@cheetahservice.com. And thanks again.